I'd like to go back to a question Scott Wright brought up when we were preparing this, which is how much time do you put into building privacy for a startup? You're just trying to get to whether this is going to work, whether this is even going to attract clients or not. It can be difficult to make those decisions. And I don't know if you, Scott, you want to voice your concern better than I can. Just
Yeah,
to.
I mean, I've been thinking about that question for over 10 years, even long before I started my company. I was doing security consulting and giving talks on privacy for social media and things like that. And it, at the time, over 10 years ago, there were lots of breaches of, startups at the time, startups like Twitter and Facebook, and everybody was asking, so why are these startups so insecure, right? And it was really the problem of, you start something and see if it's going to work, see if it will sell. And you only have so much budget, and what will you spend it on? Will you spend it on the privacy and security safeguards that make it, robust and secure, or will you spend it on the features that will show investors that you can actually grow the thing into a real viable product? And so that's always a challenge for startups, but it doesn't mean that you can't take privacy into account from the beginning, and talk about things like data minimization or segmentation or the business model, and even as Abigail said, not the technology itself, but how your business operates. How are you actually handling that information? So it's a lot less to do with how much you spend on coding in the security or the privacy, and more on thinking a little bit. One of the things I did when I started ClickArmor was I talked to people I knew who had worked at the privacy commissioner's office, and first thing they said was data minimization. Okay, so yeah, let's think about what is the information that we need to keep, and sometimes, as I said before, the employers or the customer wants the data, and so that's part of the value of the product. But you can work around what's the responsibility, what is the model that needs to be used, what's the retention, and things like that. And even in the architecting of it, you can split apart the data that's being collected and used for operating the system and providing reports from the actual identities of people. And as long as you have enough records or people, there is that aggregation issue where you can sort of create some anonymity. And
I did have a startup the other day who said they couldn't afford to run the PIA because the money had to go into the product. I hear that line all the time. And I said, okay, so you're finishing your basement and you've done your electrical work on your own, and now you're going to do all the drywall. What's probably going to happen is you're going to have someone come in next week or next month and tell you you're going to have to rip it out and redo the electrical. So you're either paying a little bit of money and time now, or you're likely paying a lot of money and time later.
The good news is you don't have to start from scratch. If you're a software engineer, go onto GitHub. There are entire libraries of code. If you are designing an app, and this is where it gets really, really complicated, first step before you even want to talk to your investors, unless you're planning on running a creepy app that is just going to run on ad tech and monetizing people all the time, don't use a framework that's built for that purpose. So Unity, for example, and I will call them out. It was so frustrating because I was trying to help my client in addressing some of their issues in a hurry, and I couldn't even get transparency. You talk about knowing your data. How can you tell people what you're doing with their data when you don't even know? What these development frameworks like that one do is they pretty much create a pipeline. They ask you to bring the audience. They put a pipeline through all of their software development kits that are in there by default, through all kinds of trackers that are in there by default, that broadcast data that they grab from you without showing you the raw underlying data. So that's the other piece. You don't even get access to the stuff underneath. You get some piddly little crumbs afterwards in the form of insights. Google Analytics does the same thing. And meanwhile, they create these rich profiles and they sell and they market in this, and then you get maybe 30 cents on the dollar for it. And by the way, there's a lot of ad fraud, and anyone who follows me will see I reshare that stuff all of the time. You're not getting value for money. So it's bad for your end users, especially if they're children and you're not doing your proper age verification, which again, there are turnkey solutions to do that. But on the positive note though, there are app development frameworks that are specifically designed with privacy by design and security by design in them. And yes, there's a little bit of upfront cost in the beginning, but some of them, if you're a startup, they have incubator programs. And I'll give you a few examples. Digi.me, Data Swift. Those are two that are built on a decentralized approach. Then there's also MedStack. And although it's called MedStack and it started out mostly for health apps and health app startups, it's like having your own privacy engineer living inside your app, helping you with a layer of continually updated requirements at a technical level to keep you up to speed on your compliance requirements. That can actually accelerate your time to market without all of the burden of having to rip out the pipes and you realize that maybe your building's going to fall down because it's not structurally sound, right? So there are,
I learned years ago the problem of re-identification, right? That if you don't have enough data or you've got some unique data, that it's pretty easy to figure out who was the person who did this. So those are just things you have to think about when you're starting to build the business and the products, so that you don't box yourself into something. And
I guess a devil's advocate perspective, because there's a lot of small business out there and their intentions are always good. I would assume, let's just start from that perspective. But basically, and I'm riffing on what Scott said about privacy by design being difficult, and the fact that there are alternative products out there that are better than the ones we have here. But as we know, experience is also lacking. So the big tech can afford the fines, and we know with the new CPPA, it's much more expensive, to be non-compliant. So the small businesses that are trying but really don't know as much and don't have lawyers will probably close their businesses because they haven't been able to do this from the outset. It's not an excuse, but what I'm saying is that it's still nascent. There's still a lot of stuff out there even from PrivTech that's still not what we consider mainstream. It's the reason why adoption is going to still be slow. It's not there yet. So how do you respond to that? I mean, will big tech always win because they have the deep pockets to be able to pay the fines and still somewhat comply?
See, well, I find the bigger the company, the worse the hole they've dug. So like a small company can, and then Scott can answer this one if I'm right or wrong, but the smaller companies are collecting less data and they have less stuff. When I walk into bigger companies that are running like 6 different versions of their app, they're the ones that are like, well, I don't even know where to start with this. And then for them doing like user rights, being able to grab someone's data or delete the user from the system, again, that's siloed, 6 different people. It's got to go from customer service to development to the person responsible for the database. So I actually find setting up these processes and policies, as Abigail had said too, because this is also a lot of process, setting up those processes, doing a data map, all that stuff for a smaller company is actually much simpler and faster.
I mean, the one thing I'm getting out of this session, which is really awesome, is I'm learning about stuff that I didn't know about in terms of the tools and things that the resources. And I'm a guy that I think knew something about privacy and security beforehand, but think of all the people who don't. And also in a small business, 5, 10 people in a startup, yes, it might be easy to do that stuff, but there are so many things on the radar. It's really hard to find the time to focus on it for any length of time. So I'm actually looking forward to following up with all you guys later to see how we can do better.